Myth number one is that we are living longer because of the medical system. Before you go, oh, hold on, modern medicine has saved so many lives and I know someone. What I want to describe to you is the process behind all this and the myths that are behind it. And the first and foremost is understanding living longer. Living longer is an average. And it's taken literally from the day we're born right through to the day that we die. And so the people who are living longer now were born 70, 80, 90 years ago. To put that in perspective. On that, it's all about averages as well, so that if you've got a deaths at birth, as in the first year, it skews that average right down. So it's about averages. A lot of confusion of what it really means. But when we look at the actual facts and figures behind it all, modern medicine has played a role, both positive and negative. And I want to go through this. And part of these myths that I'm putting up is to get people thinking and questioning. I don't mind if you're questioning what I'm putting up. I think it's fantastic. One of the first lectures I ever went to, a founding professor who got me thinking 40, 50 years ago said, ask questions, don't stop questioning, always question. But don't just question me, question everybody in the system. Question the medical doctors, question the pharmaceutical companies, question the vested interests and all these. So we've got these medical myths here. And the first one is life expectancy has increased without any doubt. And the major factors that have led to this life expectancy increase literally in the last 120 years, because prior to that, our life expectancy, depending on where you lived in the world, would have been 45 to 59 or something like that. And that, by the way, that also meant that there are still people living to 110 years of age and 100. It's just that a lot of people died very, very young. Anyway, coming back, life expectancy, probably the most significant ones are water hygiene. Without any doubt, the addition of chlorine 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, just over 100 years ago, made a huge difference. Now, I'm not a fan of chlorine in water, but in terms of saving lives, it was the single biggest factor. When you see a national tragedy, a hurricane or floods or something, one of the first and biggest problems associated with that is getting uncontaminated water to the people who are in those situations. And that's because as soon as you've got the floods and the hurricanes and the disaster, you've got all the bacteria getting into the water systems and so on. So chlorinated water was a huge development in terms of saving lives, particular waterborne disease, but also waterborne foodborne, but also in the young age. So it had a huge impact on the average life expectancy. You've got sewage and sewerage. Sewerage is the actual system that carries it usually, and sewage is the liquid and so on in there. And again, just over 100 years ago, they realised that if we can actually get all those liquids going that were going into the pots and the holes and the streets and everywhere else off those streets, then all of a sudden, and a lot of it was going into the groundwater, which was then being consumed, and as a result, you get that recycling of all the human feces going through the groundwater. So again, coming back to water hygiene and getting the waste, that toxic human fecal waste away from humans as fast as possible. A huge difference. The history and the epidemiology of that is really interesting, because prior to that, they thought it was either something in the air that was killing people around this area, until they realised it was a well. And the gentleman who first identified that, a doctor, was actually criticised seriously for all of his thinking of how can you think that ridiculous? You know, it's coming from the ground and water. So coming back, so you've got domestic hygiene, and here I'm talking about, again, basic cleanliness around the home. And we're not talking about the 21st century cleanliness where people are over hygienizing, they're using far too many toxic chemicals. We're talking about basic concepts of making sure that there are no rats in the house and mice in the house and cockroaches in the house and mold growing on walls and all those other bits and pieces which were so common, again, 100 years ago. And so we've come a long way, and getting rid of all of the rubbish and garbage every week. So the truck comes along or the van comes along and the rubbish goes out. That accumulated waste was always a breeding ground for toxic microorganisms, which are then spread through the rats, fleas, flies, and all those other contaminating organisms. So hygiene has played the most significant role. And then we've also got hospital hygiene. It took something like 30 years to convince the medical system that a doctor going from looking at a dead body in a mortuary to delivering a baby was actually dangerous, and there was a need for washing hands. Again, coming back to basic hygiene concepts. And all of those factors, including food hygiene, food hygiene, all led to a dramatic fall in infant mortality. So that's the age group that skews that average right down. So it takes it literally from so many, a third or a quarter of the population of infants dying in those first years, to making it a much rarer occurrence 100 years later. Hence, the average life expectancy is skewed much wider nowadays. And so we've got the hospital hygiene, food hygiene, obviously very, very important, and just general awareness. And again, people take it to extremes and are too worried about it, but you would know about food hygiene if you go to some of the third world countries. The risk of getting what we call here in Australia Bali belly, or a food-borne infection, increases when you go overseas. For the simple reason, food, water, hygiene. Then you've got food availability. And while the food we're eating now, we've kind of gone one stage further in a negative way, food availability was a big player 100 years ago for most populations around the world in terms of infant mortality, in terms of childhood health and extending the life. Because not having enough food, there's a great role for fasting and eating well and all those, but not having enough food to create the basic fundamental health principles of the strong bones, metabolic health, healthy immune system, all those things is so important in those first 3 to 5 years. And you'll see some of that in my other videos on the gut microbiome, the importance of all that. And so food availability early on in life, again, has extended that a lifetime expectancy, the average out there, but also means it's available for the older populations. And again, 100 years ago, you'll find that there was a lot of mortality in the older age as a result of shortages in food, because food availability was very cyclical. And then you've got antibiotics, and antibiotics, obviously, the medicine, antibiotics has it's a double-edged sword. On one side, it's provided huge savings of lives in times of wars and things like that, where there's been outbreaks, marvelous, fantastic benefits of antibiotics, but now it's used in animal food where it shouldn't be. Now, not in Europe, by the way, and some other countries around the world, and it's used too widely. I think in Australia and most Western countries, the average child has 2 to 3 doses of antibiotics in their first year of their life, first 2 to 3 years every year. And the problem with that is it creates an antibiotic microbiome. Again, there's a whole video just on that one showing how disastrous that is for long-term health and well-being. But in the short term, antibiotics has played a huge role. And you have to remember antibiotics, the timing of that is kind of 70, 80 years ago. And the widespread benefit of that is now what we're seeing. So it, again, led to this, a reduction in infant mortality. And those people born when antibiotics were first, penicillin was first introduced and so on, for those first 30, 40, 50 years, are the people coming through now. So remember, you need to remember there's a delayed time as well as that average. And then we've got, in more modern times, the last 50, 60 years, we've got a lot of safety issues that have been introduced. And one of the most prominent ones that I remember is drink driving. And the statistics on drink driving are very, very clear. The death rate in one of the states in Australia, I think it was Victoria, went from 3,000 to 1,000. And then it's consistently dropped down. So, wow, that's huge. And that was, the introduction at the end of the 70s, early 80s, and around the different states. And the benefit of that is, if you think about it, those people in the 70s now, we're talking 40, 50 years on, that they are now living as well. So all of these are averaged out, and we end up now with those people literally in their 50s, 40s, 50s and 60s who survive, because literally they cut the death rate down by around about 70% for drink driving deaths, simply as a result of one action. Now that doesn't even mention the role of seatbelts and other tools that you've used in driving. which was a major killer. And then you've got, so there, smoking. Smoking has declined post-World War II. The smoking rates in Australia have literally declined from something like 50%. When we were doing research on smoking rates and the role of smoking in measuring and monitoring smoking, that was my research group at university, the smoking rates were about 16 and 18%. Now they're down to 10 and 11%. And again, that tends to be reflected in a younger age group. So it's the 17 or the 15 through to the 17s and the 21s who aren't taking up smoking now, which will have a benefit 60 years on past that. So they will be living longer as a result of it. So all of those. And then you've also got to consider all the other factors like the socioeconomic factors. And one of the major socioeconomic factors, there are many in there that have an impact on life expectancy, but one of the major factors in life expectancy is your education. And so if you've got a primary school, you're not expected just primary school compared to high school, compared to university, that as you go up, you have a higher life expectancy. And that's not because every degree you get is actually a ticket to living longer. That would mean then if you have 3 or 4 degrees at the end, you would live even longer, but that's not the case. It's really a matter of education, qualifications, and education enables you to be much more thoughtful, creative. You're more learned, you read more, you tend to participate more in society, and as a result of that, you tend to get those influences of a lot of things like healthy eating. And there's a lot of evidence on the role of education level in diabetes and heart attack and stroke and some forms of cancer and so on. So education plays a big role in there. And yet this is all ignored when the medical system says, oh, we've extended life. Now, what's interesting about the role of how medicine has extended life, when I've found someone quoting it, they go back to another quote, to another quote, to another quote, and provide very little evidence of the actual benefit of medicine. Now, maybe there is and maybe there isn't, but it's over-exaggerated and embellished. And then that takes us to the modern medicine. And up here, first of all, modern medicine, without any doubt, and this is published in hundreds and hundreds of scientific journals, modern medicine exaggerates the benefits and downplays the harm. So the side effects are often mentioned, and it may have some side effects, and it may do that. There are some great websites around that go into this, and they will highlight the actual facts. So if you take a medicine, what is the actual likelihood that it will benefit you? So the cause of harm and the benefit, it weighs them up. And this is called the number needed to treat, the NNT. And there's the NNT.com, a group of research scientists and medical doctors who put that forward. So well worth checking that out, the NNT.com. And it shows you that some of the drugs that are commonly prescribed, I'll mention some of them later, but they're on the kind of the red list and even on the black list. And the red list may be a benefit, blacklist don't go there. And so they're some of the most common drugs used, for example, in cholesterol lowering. So the message is, if you hear about the benefits, remember there are all these side effects. And when they do scientific research, it's really important to understand that not all of the side effects are known. They're used on the guinea pigs who take the drugs for the first 20 or 30 years, called the humans. And as a result of that, these are introduced widely. People are using them widely, and as a result of that, you've got side effects that aren't known for many, many years, even decades. Now, here's another big one that really sets the cat amongst the pigeons. The research constantly coming out of the US and around the world shows literally that medicine is the 3rd biggest killer in developed countries. So after cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes and cancer, medicine comes in as number 3, a close number 3, as a result of not of the people who are dying in hospitals, but the people who shouldn't be dying in hospitals or dying when medication when they shouldn't be. They're given the wrong medicine, the wrong type, the wrong reactions, the wrong operation, the wrong, whatever it is, the whole procedure has gone wrong. And it's the 3rd biggest killer in Western society. So if you can understand that and put that in perspective, then you say, oh, hold on. So it's also killing a lot. And we're still going to question the real benefits of some of them, as I've just highlighted, and the real facts and figures over here. And then you go on to, the longest lived populations. So these are known as the blue zones. And there are some religious groups that have very little or no medical intervention. Mormon populations in the US are kind of like a blue population group in an area of very sick people, and they live longer, they're healthier, live longer, and have much lower rates of all the cardiovascular diseases and other conditions associated with modern society. And then you go to Okinawa, then you go to the remote hills of here and there, and medical intervention plays next to no role in all of these populations. They are the ones, however, that all live longer. So again, it raises that questioning. Hold on, what if we put all that money into prevention rather than into the trillions of dollars spent on treatment that's not very effective, and put the trillions of dollars into, but there's no money to be made. Coming back here, look at some of these. Again, these are just some facts to get you questioning the whole process. And US rates, 47th, the United States rates 47th in longevity, despite the fact that, of course, depending on which figures you look at, they spend more on pharmaceuticals than the rest of the world combined. What? Yep. And yet they rate 47th or even lower, according to some stats. They were the 23 years. And so it seems that literally the greater the expenditure on medicine, the sicker the population, the lower the life expectancy. And we actually see that the life expectancy in the US has actually gone up over up until about 5-6 years ago, and then it starts to go down. Because now we're starting to get the people coming through from, again, as 50, 60, 70 years ago, the introduction of junk foods, the average moving down a little bit, the toxic lifestyles that we live in, it's just going to drop down. And I have no doubt around the world that you're going to see this consistently in countries that have a lot of the toxic Western lifestyles. It's going to start dropping down. Life expectancy of the people who know will continue to go up. The life expectancy of the people who don't know, unfortunately, the majority of the population will start to go down. Then we've got, and this is probably my biggest concern here, and people don't realize that the actual denial and outright opposition of medicine to anything other than pharmaceutical and or medical intervention is based. So using the big bits of medical equipment and all the medicines and so on. And it's basically the outright denial that things like supplements work, herbs work, nutrition work, and lifestyle advice. I want to make it very clear that according to the Center for Disease Control in the US, literally nobody has died from a supplement in the past. I think it's the past 10 or 12 years that they've been doing these figures. So I know people, the medical system is always putting out in the media that, oh, these supplements are deadly and always be careful on how you use them. Always be careful on how you use them and always follow the professional advice. However, put it in perspective, please, of the over 100,000 people who die from the medications and so on. And that's not even mentioning the perhaps millions of people who have side effects. So we've got the outright denial and opposition to supplements, herbs, nutrition, and lifestyle. Now, they will give you some, and in some cases to do with lifestyle advice, one of the first things when you get sick, they'll say, okay, do a bit of exercise and so on, but they're limited to what they do. Now, this isn't an attack on the GPs, the doctors, the medical doctors, the front line, because a lot of those people want to actually get out there and promote this. However, in every one of the major developed countries, there is an overriding body that does not allow them to do it. There was a classical case study where it ended up going to court in Australia, where the diabetes specialist and cardiovascular metabolic health specialist was actually recommending people go on a keto diet and do these other things, and the medical system didn't like that. They deregistered him. He took them to court. He won because he said he could no longer promote the system that was leading to the premature deaths of these people, and he promoted a healthier system that was working and showed up in the results and in the scientific research. So please don't confuse medicine with scientific research. Medicine is when it's paid for, and they get their millions, billions of dollars spent on research and the outcomes. Medicine and research, on the other hand, is all these great studies that I'm always referring to. So we know that the medical practitioners actually want to do this and would love to go, and there's certain groups of them who have gone beyond their original training. Now, it's also worth bearing in mind that the average practitioner has 5 to 10 hours of study of nutrition in their degree on medicine. So all those 5, 6 years or so, what do? They do half a dozen hours on nutrition. And usually that's looking at some of the basic metabolic pathways rather than the role of those in that. For example, the role of vitamin B in terms of having an influence on anxiety or energy levels or whatever. So the message is it's an outright denial. And you've got classic examples here, and I've got videos on all of these you can have a look at. And osteoporosis, the general consensus in the medical system is if you've got osteoporosis, you can't regrow bone. Well, you can increase bone mineral density. The second thing is you take vitamin D and calcium, which are, by the way, supplements, but they don't really work. It's some of the worst evidence-based medicine you've got. Calcium is not a great supplement in any account, and I generally don't recommend it. But here you've got them recommending something that we were talking about 20, 30 years ago, and it's now fully outdated. There are thousands of studies on the role of supplements, combinations of supplements, along with herbs and nutritional and lifestyle benefits to actually regrow bone. And of course, that's in a whole series I've done of videos on osteoporosis, and the evidence is there. Thousands upon thousands of studies. The same in herbs and nutrition. Then we've got hypertension. I spent the first year of literally 2020 reading up and reading all about hypertension, writing a book on it for the reason I was stuck in a COVID lockdown. And there are thousands of studies highlighting the role and benefit of nutrition for reversing hypertension. So in some cases, people are on 4 or 5 drugs and it still doesn't have an effect because it's not getting to the baseline. You see, all of our metabolic illnesses are as a result of poor nutrition and lifestyle. There is no doubt about it. That's why they're called metabolic illnesses. So we look at the metabolism, and what feeds the metabolism is nutrition. And in hypertension, absolute denial that any of these herbs, despite the fact the studies are there on so many aspects of nutrition. And if you're in denial about that one, go and check out the videos I have on hypertension. Then we've got cholesterol. Cholesterol is the biggest con that we have seen. Cholesterol is one of the most important chemicals in the body, and I'll elaborate on this a little bit further, and I have other videos on it. In fact, the studies show the higher total cholesterol you've got, the longer lived you are, and over about 45, 50, particularly for postmenopausal women, it's more protective, even more protective. And where we get into it is caught up in the original fat. Oh, fat must be the deadly one. No. In the 1950s. Oh, and all the research now shows that was driven by the sugar industry and the pharmaceutical industry. If we blame fat, then we can get a drug to hold on, and then it went from fat to cholesterol, then it went from a chameleon theory, you see, and then it went from cholesterol to the LDL to HDL ratio, and then it went to the LDL, and it's actually oxidized cholesterol, but it's not the cholesterol, it's the oxidation process that leads to the problem. But you'll see the other videos on that. So those 3 major issues in developed countries is just an example of where we've gone wrong. So we've been totally disempowered. We've been totally disempowered to look for our own answers and things to do. I've seen so many people who said, I can't do anything. And the answer is, well, at some stages you may be at a stage where you can't, but for the vast majority of people, there's extra things that everybody should be doing to regain their health and balance and to extend their life. But not just to extend their life, extend the quality of your life, to enjoy the days without the aches and the pains and the seriousness of the illness and the conditions and the worry and the fear and the fret that you've got. So all of these things, and when we look at some of the things like the omega-3 fatty acids, how great they are, and there was denial of that for literally 50 years. That was kind of 1950s research, and originally looking at the Eskimos, and always best, by the way, to get your omega-3s from your fish, but denial that the omega-3s had any role in cardiovascular disease, and yet they got a role in so many other factors. Folate was the same. The major person who pushed this forward was a lady called Fiona Stanley, in Western Australia who won accolades and awards for it, and yet it was also known for 20 or 30 or 40 years before that. She did the research to highlight it, which was fantastic, marvelous. But until that was done, the complete denial of the role of folate in births and so on, health outcomes in birth. And then another one, Helicobacter, again, another local one in Western Australia, where 2 local doctors identified a bacteria that was causing ulcers. And again, total denial. They took it to conference after conference after conference. And the conferences are fantastic, but they couldn't get to the medical conferences because it was, no, it's not possible. We've got our medication that treats the ulcers in the stomach. We've got our medication that treats all of those conditions. And so it was literally denied until ultimately they poisoned themselves with the Helicobacter, developed cancer. The ulcers, reversed it using some very simple antibiotics, and voila, it is now accepted, that Helicobacter. But again, it took 20 years, and it took these 2 doctors to put their own lives at risk to be able to get the point across, rather than reading the studies and looking at the studies and expanding on it further. Now, the great thing is, in so many areas, there is ample evidence, fantastic evidence about the role of nutrition and lifestyle and things. And the fact that modern medicine disempowers us is probably, I believe, the greatest negative impact it has. I have no doubt that there's a small number of modern medicines that are absolutely fantastic for saving lives. And I've been saved, my life has been saved in hospital too, yes. But at the end of the day, I'm very conscious of the fact that the role all these things have played, the negative role of medicine, and sometimes I have to ask that question, has it really contributed to the extension of our lives?